remember the way the office lights looked that evening in Denver, how they glowed a soft amber against the windows as the snow outside drifted sideways like a slow curtain. I had just closed the biggest account of my career, a contract worth $2.4 million, and my team had already gone home to celebrate the coming holidays. I stayed behind for a few minutes. Want the quiet after a year that felt like running on a treadmill set too fast. My name is Brooklyn, 32 years old, a senior account manager who had spent the last 8 years believing that if I worked hard enough, earned enough, provided enough, maybe my family would finally look at me the way I had always looked at them, as someone worth loving, as someone worth keeping. I remember packing up my laptop, already thinking about the Christmas dinner I had hosted every single year since I was in my early 20s, a tradition that started small and became an obligation I never questioned. I was reaching for my coat when my phone buzzed against the edge of my desk. I almost ignored it. This time of year, the messages never slowed down. Someone always needed something. But when I glanced at the screen, the subject line stopped me cold. It said, "You need to see this before Christmas." No sender listed. No preview. Nothing that looked even remotely familiar. For a second, I stood there in the soft light of the office, unsure. What were you doing when listening to this story right now? For me, at that moment, I was still standing beside my cubicle, holding my phone in my hand, thinking the night would end normally. I had no idea that within a few seconds, everything I believed about my family, about my role in their lives, would shift like ice cracking underfoot. I tapped on the email, expecting spam or a mistaken address. There was no text inside. Only a single video file. My stomach reacted before my mind could. A twisted heaviness settled under my ribs as I pressed play. The screen filled with the living room of the house in Aurora, the one I still helped my parents pay for. The camera angle wobbled slightly, as if someone had recorded it while pretending not to. I recognized the furniture instantly. The sofa with the stitched pattern my mom loved. The recliner I bought Dad for Father's Day. The side table that I assembled myself one weekend when they complained the old one was leaning to the left. They were all there. Dad sitting back with a drink in his hand, Mom perched comfortably on the arm of the couch, and my little sister Lila, 27 years old, cross-legged on the rug as if she owned the place. They looked relaxed, happy, like a family enjoying a peaceful night together, a night I had not been invited to. Then Dad spoke, his voice lazy with amusement. "She is our workhorse." There was laughter, real laughter, not the polite chuckles they gave me when I stopped by after work, or brought groceries, or paid a bill. These were unguarded laughs, the kind that warmed a room when it came from the right kind of love. Except it was not love. It was an amusement at my expense, at who I was to them. Mom leaned in and said something that made Lila burst out giggling. I turned up the volume, and my own heartbeat filled my ears as Lila's voice came through, soft but sharp. I wish she would disappear. My life would be so much easier. The psychic said so. I felt something slip in my chest. Not break exactly, but shift in a way I had never felt before. Psychic. I had heard pieces of that before. Lila always talked about energy and aura, about blockages and manifesting, but hearing her say that her life would be easier if I disappeared was something different, something that made the skin on my arms prickle. I watched the video once, twice, a third time. Each time, the cold spread a little further down my spine. I waited for the moment where someone would step in and say, "Enough." I waited for Mom to tell Lila that was too far. I waited for Dad to defend me, even a little. But they did not. They just let the moment pass, as if it were ordinary for them to talk about me. Like this. I looked around my small apartment, the one I lived in because my salary stretched thin across too many directions. I saw the bare walls I never bothered decorating, the old couch I promised myself I would replace, the stack of overdue errands that never mattered because my family's needs always came first. I thought about the $1,850 I paid every month toward their mortgage, the $540 for Dad's truck payment that I had been covering for nearly 2 years. The endless $300 or $400 transfers for Lila's rituals, and ceremonies aimed at fixing her life or her energy, or her luck. All at once, I understood that I had not been a daughter to them for a long time. I had been a resource, a utility, something expected to perform without complaint. I sat down on the edge of my bed, still holding my coat in one hand. My breath felt thin. I should have cried. I should have shouted. But instead, something steady rose inside me, something I had not felt in years. Enough. The words slipped out before I could stop it, barely more than a whisper, but it changed the air around me. It settled into my bones. It was not dramatic or desperate. It was true, pure, final. I set the phone on my nightstand and sat very still. This Christmas would not follow the script of the 12 before it. I would not shop for ingredients, or bake the ham, or polish the silverware my mom refused to wash by hand. I would not stand in that same kitchen, stirring sauces and pretending everything was fine while my family enjoyed them. Benefits of my labor. I did not know exactly what I would do yet, only that something had ended. The moment I saw myself through their eyes, the workhorse who was meant to carry the load without protest, something inside me finally broke free from the harness I had worn for far too long. And for the first time since I was a teenager, the thought of Christmas did not feel heavy. It felt open, like a road I had never allowed myself to imagine, stretching ahead into a life that no longer belonged to anyone but me. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment for a long moment, letting the stillness settle into my chest. Nothing in the room had changed, yet everything inside me had. The heater clicked softly as it switched on, filling the space with a low hum. It felt like the world paused just long enough for me to breathe. I reached for my phone again, but this time I did not replay the video. I did not need to see their faces twisting with amusement. I did not need to hear Dad calling me the workhorse or Mom laughing like it was the funniest thing she had heard all week. I tapped the screen and slid it into silent mode. No vibration, no alerts, no chimes demanding my attention. Just quiet. A kind of quiet I had not allowed myself in years. I brushed my teeth and changed into an old cotton sweater that had softened with age. My phone screen lit up just as I walked back into the living room. It was only visible when I picked it up to place it face down. The voicemail count had already climbed past 5. Mom's voice came through the preview in that breathless tone she used whenever she felt something slipping beyond her control. Brooklyn, we need to go over the Christmas dinner list. Stop ignoring me. Then another message layered right under it. The mortgage company called again. They said we are late. Can you please handle it today? Handle it. As if I were a personal assistant. As if I did not work 10-hour days to keep the household afloat. A text from Dad came next. Not a question or a greeting, just a command. Fix the mortgage today and check the truck payment. It bounced. The blunt entitlement in his words did not sting the way it used to. This time, something inside me simply refused to absorb it. It was like I had grown a new layer of skin overnight. I put the phone down again, careful and deliberate. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the tap. The water ran warm at first, then cooler, then cold enough to tingle. I filled a glass and held it between my palms, letting the coldness ground me. I drank slowly, feeling the chill travel down my throat and settle in my stomach, clearing a fog I had carried for too long. When I came back to the living room, the phone buzzed again. This time it was Lila. The preview showed only a snippet of the voicemail. My energy is so blocked lately, and it is because of you. You know that, right? The psychic warned me. I stared at the message on the screen, a little stunned, a little unsurprised. Lila had always lived in her own universe, one where responsibility dissolved in the glow of spiritual jargon. But hearing her blame me for her latest misfortune felt like a final thread snapping. I set the phone aside and walked to the window. Outside, Denver was winding down into the night. The street below shimmered with winter lights and traffic, headlights slicing through the cold air. People who were not drowning in obligations were probably heading home to warm kitchens and children waiting in pajamas, a life I had never managed to build, because mine was always spent patching up someone else's. I rested my forehead against the glass, feeling the faint coolness. My breath fogged a small circle that disappeared as quickly as it formed. It struck me suddenly how small my world had become, how narrow, how quiet in all the wrong ways. When the phone buzzed a third time, I almost laughed at the persistence. I walked back toward the couch and glanced at the screen out of habit. It was a text from Ellie, the neighbor who lived down the hall. She was older, kind, the sort of woman who always carried tissues and peppermint candies in her purse. Her message was short. Your mom was standing outside your door for nearly 20 minutes. She seemed upset. Is everything all right? A strange sense of distance washed over me, as if I were reading about someone else's life, as if that moment belonged to a version of me that had just stepped off stage. I typed back a simple thank you, and nothing else. No explanation, no apology. I was not ready to step back into the role they assigned me. The quiet of my apartment returned, familiar, yet changed. It was no longer the quiet of exhaustion. It was the quiet before movement. Before making a choice, I sat down at my small kitchen table, took a breath, and opened my banking app. My hands were steady as I moved through each section. The passwords were old, familiar, ones I had created when I believed that protecting everyone else meant protecting myself. But the world had shifted. Or maybe I finally had. I opened the settings and reset them all, one by one, creating new combinations no one but me would ever know. Email, bank, insurance, Amazon, utilities, all the accounts they had quietly relied on for years. Then I enabled two-factor authentication and watched the verification codes arrive like a quiet little storm, each one another door closing behind me. As each code came through, a soft pulse of relief followed it. Not triumph, not anger, just relief. A gentle reclaiming of something I should have never let go. The heaviness in my chest faded. Not completely, but enough that I felt the first whisper of space inside me. Space I did not know I needed. I opened the website for my apartment complex and filled out a maintenance request. It asked for a reason. I wrote simply about security concerns and asked for a lock replacement before the end of the day. The building manager responded within minutes, confirming a technician would come by that afternoon. Hire slid through me, not the kind that came from fixing a problem for someone else, but the kind that came from choosing myself. It felt foreign and familiar at the same time. My phone lit up again. Voicemail number 12, then 13, then 14. Mom alternated between frantic planning for Christmas and scolding me for not answering. Dad continued sending curt demands. Lila left a long, rambling message about her blocked aura and how she needed me to send money for another session with her psychic. It had been only about 12 hours since I had gone silent. Yet to them, my quiet was already an emergency. They depended so heavily on my immediate response that any delay felt like betrayal. I used to think that made me important. Now I saw it made me useful. I turned on the kettle, letting the sound steady me. The air smelled faintly of peppermint from a candle I lit earlier that week. As the water heated, I leaned against the counter and let my mind drift. I could not remember the last time I spent a holiday the way I wanted. Every Christmas had been a performance, one where I played the dependable daughter, the emotional glue, the financial lifeline. This year was supposed to be the same. Another dinner I cooked, another evening of pretending everything was fine. But the video showed me what existed underneath the surface, and once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. The kettle whistled softly. I made tea and carried it to the couch. I curled up under a blanket, not to hide, but to settle in with a feeling I did not recognize at first. Freedom. It was quiet, cautious, but it was there. I picked up my laptop next, the familiar weight grounding me. I opened a travel website and typed Denver to Lake Tahoe in the search bar. I had always dreamed of spending a winter somewhere peaceful. Same I could hear my own thoughts without the echo of someone else's. Demands. Flights popped up instantly. One that left the next morning at 9:20. Another at noon. Another in the early evening. My eyes lingered on the earliest one. A morning flight meant leaving before anyone fully realized I had stepped out of their reach. I clicked it. My hands did not shake. I selected a window seat and paid for it without hesitation. A bloom of warmth spread across my chest. Not joy, exactly, but something close. Something like reclaiming the part of me that had gone quiet. I sat back slowly, sipping tea, feeling the steam warm my face. My body responded before my mind caught up. This was it. I was leaving. Not forever. Not with dramatic flair, but with a decision that was quiet and powerful and overdue. I would be gone before they even knew I was not coming to Christmas dinner. Gone before another voicemail demanded more of me. Gone before I stepped into another year carrying the same weight that had nearly worn me down. My phone buzzed again, but I did not look. Instead, I closed the laptop and rested my hand on the arm of the couch. Feeling my pulse steady, the noise of my life seemed far away, as if someone had finally turned the volume down. Tomorrow, I would be on a plane flying over the mountains, headed toward a place where no one expected anything from me. A place where I could sit with myself and figure out what came next. I did not owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace. Not anymore. The technician knocked on my door just after 8 that evening. A young man with kind eyes and a tool belt stepped inside. As he worked on the lock, removing the old one and fitting in the new, I stood nearby, listening to the clicks and turns. Each sound felt like closing a chapter, even though I had not yet put words to what the next one would be. He tightened the final screw and handed me the new set of keys. I thanked him, and when he left, the hallway fell silent again. My apartment feels different now. Safer. More mine. My flight confirmation was in my email. My suitcase stood ready in the closet, and every message from my family sat unanswered on my phone. I walked to the window again and looked out at the city lights. The glow of the skyline shimmered in the cold air, a quiet reminder that the world was larger than the small box I had been, trapped in for so long. Something in me finally settled. At 9:20 the next morning, I would be somewhere in the air between Denver and Lake Tahoe, leaving behind the life that had chained me for far too long. And this time, I was not afraid of the silence. I was ready for it. At 9:20 the next morning, I would be somewhere in the air between Denver and Lake Tahoe, leaving behind the life that had chained me for far too long. But before I could disappear, there was one thing I needed to understand. I needed to know who had recorded that video and why it had found its way to me on that particular night. I woke early, long before the sun lifted over the city. I made coffee, sat at the tiny kitchen table, and stared out at the quiet parking lot below. The world felt different, as if I had stepped off a moving train and everything was still rushing past me. My flight was booked. My bags were half packed, and yet one question kept looping in my mind. Who sent it? And what were they trying to tell me? By 8:30, I had messaged only one person who might know the truth, someone I barely knew, but someone who had been in that house enough times to have witnessed pieces of my family I had never seen. Marina Faulkner. I typed a short message asking if she could meet for coffee downtown. She responded within minutes and suggested a small place on Larimer Street that opened early and was usually quiet. I showered, dressed in jeans and a warm sweater, and headed out into the cold Denver morning. The air bit at my cheeks as I walked from the parking garage, but the chill helped me stay focused. I had no idea what Marina would say. I only knew I needed to hear it. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and dark roast. She was already there, sitting near the back with her hands wrapped around a mug, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. When she saw me, she gave a small wave and a cautious smile, the kind you give someone you have met a handful of times but never truly known. I slid into the seat across from her. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other, both trying to bridge the gap between politeness and honesty. She spoke first, her voice lower than I remembered. I figured you saw the video. I nodded, fingers tightening around my cup. Did you send it? She shook her head immediately. No. But I did record it. For a moment, I could not breathe. Even though part of me had suspected it, hearing her say it felt like a string pulling tight inside my chest. I asked her why, and she let out a long breath, like she had been holding it for months. 2 years ago, Lila dragged me to see some energy healer. She said she needed help because her aura felt heavy. Marina rolled her eyes gently. Not in mockery, but in tired recognition. It was the kind of expression that told me she had been through this more than once. The healer told her that someone in her life was blocking her path, dimming her light, keeping her from success. And Lila became obsessed with the idea that it was you. I leaned back, letting the words settle. It sounded ridiculous and yet painfully familiar. Lila always believed her life would change if she found the right person to tell her what she wanted to hear. She blamed me, I said quietly. Marina nodded. She talked about it constantly. It went from silly comments to something darker. Like she needed you out of the way so her life could finally start. A small tremor moved through me. Not fear exactly, but a cold recognition of something I had ignored for too long. I asked her how the recording happened. She folded her hands in front of her and spoke carefully, like she was replaying each frame in her mind. I stepped away to use the bathroom. When I came out, they were all talking in the living room. Your dad, your mom, Lila. And they were laughing in a way I had never heard them laugh before. It wasn't a joke, though. It was mean. It was targeted. And it was easy for them. Her voice softened. I pulled out my phone without thinking. I guess I just needed proof that it was as cruel as it sounded. I stared at her, trying to picture the evening through her eyes, the warmth of a family gathering, the light from the lamps, the small hum of casual conversation, and then cruelty, spoken so casually it felt rehearsed. You did the right thing, I murmured, though part of me ached knowing that the truth had come from a stranger, and not from anyone inside my family. But I didn't send it, she added quickly. I swear. There were a couple of other people there that night, friends of your parents. Anyone could have seen me record it. Anyone could have taken a copy. I never showed it to anyone. I looked down at my hands, absorbing her words. Someone else. Someone in that room who had watched my family tear me apart with their laughter. Someone who saw it and chose to quietly send me the truth. Do you think they meant to help me? I asked. Marina hesitated. Maybe. Or maybe they just wanted you to know what you were dealing with. Maybe they thought you deserved honesty, even if it hurt. I felt something shift inside me again, the same way it had when I watched the video the first time. A puzzle piece clicking into place. Marina leaned forward slightly. Brooklyn, if they spoke like that about you when you weren't even in the house, imagine what they have said over the last 8 years. Imagine how they really see you. Her words were gentle, but they landed with the force of truth. 8 years of bank transfers, Christmas dinners, emergency payments, long nights fixing their problems. 8 years of believing that love meant carrying every burden. I breathed in slowly, letting the hurt expand and then change shape. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like clarity, a kind of clarity that comes only when someone holds a mirror up to the part of your life you refuse to look at. Marina watched me carefully. I could see she was waiting, maybe worrying that she had said too much, but I shook my head and gave her a faint, tired smile. Thank you. You didn't have to tell me any of this. She lifted her mug, her expression softening. Maybe not. But I figured someone should. We sat there for another few minutes, talking about nothing in particular. The weather, work, how quiet the city felt before the holidays. But beneath all of it was something unspoken, a recognition that the foundation of my life had cracked, and that someone else had helped me look at the fault line instead of pretending it wasn't there. When I finally stood up to leave, Marina touched my arm lightly. Whatever you choose to do next, make sure it is for you. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep. As I stepped back out into the cold morning, the wind swept down the street and carried away the last bit of hesitation lingering in me. I pulled my coat tighter around my body and started walking, the flight in the morning already waiting in the back of my mind. Somewhere between the hum of the city and the distant mountains, I felt the first real shift of freedom, a quiet understanding that the next step was mine to take, and no one else's. The morning light glinted across my phone screen as I held it in my hand, the air crisp around me. I took one long breath, letting the cold burn its way into my lungs, then slowly exhaled. My fingers were steady, almost too steady, Considering what I had done the night before, maybe that was the first sign that something inside me had shifted for good. I started walking toward my car with a calmness that felt almost unreal. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. And once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. The next steps came to me with a clarity I had not felt in years. Even the sound of my boots crunching against the thin layer of snow performed under a strange kind of stillness, as if the world already knew I was leaving something behind and wanted to soften the path for me. I unlocked my car, slid inside, and let the heater warm my hands. The engine hummed as I pulled out of the parking lot, and the weight of my family's voices receded with each passing block. On the drive, I called the catering company that had been preparing the Christmas dinner ordered every year, out of habit. The same $780 spread I had sent to my parents' house, every December, for more than a decade, because that was the role I was expected to fill. The daughter who made everything easier, everything prettier, everything possible. A woman answered, cheerful and bright, wishing me happy holidays. Her voice was gentle, unhurried, carrying none of the entitled edge my family used whenever they asked me for something. I kept my tone even as I said I needed to make a change to the delivery location. She asked where I wanted it sent instead, and I told her Fire Station number 12 on Monroe Street. There was a small silence on her end, the kind filled with surprised warmth rather than suspicion. She said Captain Ross and his team would be thrilled. I told her I hoped they would enjoy it. I did not offer a reason, and thankfully she did not ask. When she wished me a safe holiday, something inside my chest softened. It was the first time that day someone had spoken to me without expectation, without need, without taking, just a simple kindness floating into my world like a small gift. I drove the rest of the way home with my jaw unclenched for the first time since opening the anonymous video. By the time I parked and walked toward my building, the winter sun was already low, turning everything a soft amber. Inside my apartment, the quiet greeted me like an old friend. I kicked off my shoes, hung my coat, then sat at my laptop and opened my banking dashboard. The numbers on the screen stared back at me like they belonged to someone else. For years, my paycheck flowed straight through me into a dozen different places, none of them my own. It had been so long since I looked at my money without immediately calculating what bill of theirs needed covering next. I clicked through each automatic payment, canceling them one by one. The mortgage payment of $1,850 that I had been covering for my parents for almost 8 years. Gone. The $540 truck payment for the shiny pickup Dad insisted was essential to his identity. Gone. The $110 monthly gas payment on the same truck. Gone. Every transfer to Lila for her energy cleanses, aura resets, spiritual tune-ups, and psychic consultations. Gone in seconds. All of it disappeared with small, emotionless confirmation messages. My cursor hovered over each one out of habit, waiting for guilt to rise and stop me. Nothing did. Not guilt, not fear, not even hesitation, only relief, steady and warm, like a rope slipping off my shoulders. As soon as the last auto payment disappeared, my phone buzzed sharply against the couch cushion. Mom. Then Lila, then Mom again, as if sheer persistence could drag me back into the role she refused to see me step out of. I let it ring, watching their names flash and fade. A new voicemail from Mom appeared, and though I did not play it immediately, I already knew the cadence. First outrage, then panic, then guilt. Her voice thick and dramatic, accusing me of ruining Christmas, saying she did not know how they would host dinner without my help, crying about how the neighbors would talk. Another voicemail came from Lila, who sounded more annoyed than worried. Her voice carried that airy, irritated tone she used whenever life refused to bend to her spiritual expectations. She insisted my silence was messing with her energy stability, that her psychic had warned her about my dark shift weeks ago. And then Dad called. He never left voicemails. He simply called again and again, his calls stacked into a silent tower of pressure. His messages were never questions, only commands waiting for obedience. I let the phone fall silent on the cushion beside me. The quiet that followed was shocking in its gentleness. Instead of engaging, I opened my security settings and updated every password connected to my life. Not just a minor change, but a complete rebuild. New email logins, new bank credentials, new authentication codes. Two-factor authentication turned on for every account. Layers upon layers of protection I had never allowed myself to create. For years, I had left doors open so they could walk through whenever they want, pleased. Now those doors were closing, clicking softly into place. Around noon, I walked into the office to finalize one last responsibility. The building was hushed, the way offices often felt the day before holidays. People are already home with their families, or preparing to catch flights, or rushing to finish deadlines. I moved through the hallways feeling lighter, my steps unburdened. I headed straight to the corner office where Nate Caro, our chief operating officer, was reviewing reports. He looked up with a warm, surprised expression when I knocked. "Brooklyn, everything all right?" His concern was gentle, not invasive. I nodded. "I need to take some time off. 2 weeks starting tomorrow, if possible." Kate leaned back, studying me in that measured way he had. I had just closed the company's biggest account of the quarter, a $2.4 million deal that had set me apart. He knew my work ethic. He knew I did not make impulsive requests. After a moment, he said he would approve it immediately. He did not pry or search my face for explanations. He just trusted that I knew my limits and respected them. "Let me know if you need anything," he said. Such a simple sentence, such a normal one, but for someone who had spent years being spoken to only when someone wanted something, the offer struck me as foreign and gentle at the same time. Respect. It had been so long since I felt it that I almost forgot how grounding it was. I thanked him and walked out, lifting just a little more with each step. By the time I returned home, the afternoon sun had dipped low, turning the snow outside a soft golden pink. I pulled my suitcase from the closet, the same navy one I had used for work trips, and began folding clothes methodically. Warm sweaters, thick socks, jeans, comfortable boots, a scarf I had barely worn because every winter I was too busy scrambling between my family's emergencies to enjoy the cold. Each piece I folded felt like a declaration. Every few minutes, my phone lit up again. Mom is crying. Dad demanded I pick up. Lila accused me of sabotaging her aura. Their messages stacked like bricks against a door I had already decided would stay closed. At one point, the phone vibrated so hard it slid an inch across the couch cushion. I ignored it. I zipped my suitcase and set it near the door. Then I looked around the small apartment that had been both my refuge and my trap. The worn furniture I never replaced because something else always came up. The walls I never decorated because it felt temporary, even though I had lived there for years. The new lock, recently installed, gleamed slightly in the fading light, reminding me that safety was now something I could choose, not something I waited for. One more message appeared on my screen, but I ignored it. I powered the phone off completely, watching the display fade to black. The silence full of relief, full of space, full of possibility. It settled deep into my bones. When the sun finally slipped behind the Denver skyline, I turned off the lights, slid my suitcase handle up, and stepped into the hallway. The click of the lock behind me felt final, but not heavy. More like closing the cover of a book I had been forced to read for too long. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the elevator. The hallway was dim, quiet, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm breaks or a sunrise begins. In less than 12 hours, I would be on a plane, leaving Denver behind before my family even understood I was no longer within reach. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside. The air was cool, the lighting faint. I watched the numbers descend as the elevator carried me down, floor by floor, and something loosened inside me. A knot unwinding, a weight dissolving, a truth settling. For the first time in my adult life, I was leaving a place without looking back. And I did not feel lost. I felt found. The next morning came early. I barely remember the ride to the airport. Just the dark streets and the little pools of light from the street lamps sliding over the hood of the rideshare car. At the terminal, I moved on autopilot, checking my bag, walking through security, finding my gate. It felt strange to be traveling for myself and not for work or for some family emergency. No laptop full of presentation slides. No list of errands for mom taped to a cabinet. Just me and a small suitcase. By the time the plane lifted off, Denver was wrapped in soft clouds beneath us. I watched the city fall away through the oval window and felt the first quiet. Exhale in a long time. There was nothing they could call me for up here. Nothing they could demand that I fix from 30,000 feet above them. Ground. The flight to Reno was short and smooth. From there, a shuttle wound its way up toward Lake Tahoe, past tall pines dusted with snow and steep, rocky hillsides. The air looked clearer somehow, lighter. When the shuttle finally turned into the long drive of the Summit Crest Lodge, my breath caught. The lodge sat on a rise overlooking the lake, its dark wood and stone facade dotted with warm windows. Smoke curled from a chimney, and the glass doors reflected the snowy landscape like a painting. I stepped off the shuttle and was hit by the crisp, cold air and the soft hush that comes when snow absorbs all the usual sounds. No sirens, no traffic, just the distant call of a bird and the muffled crunch of my boots. Inside, the lobby was all polished wood and tall ceilings, with a fire burning in a large stone fireplace. A woman at the front desk greeted me with a genuine smile and used my name as if it meant something more than a bank account. When she handed me the key card to my room and a map of the lodge, I felt almost guilty, like I had snuck into a life meant for someone else. My room overlooked the lake. Through the large window, I could see the water stretching out, a deep blue-gray under a pale sky, framed by snow-laden trees. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, letting my body register the fact that I was here. Not in Aurora, not in Denver, here, just me. Only then did I turn my phone back on. It lit up with a storm of notifications. Voicemail after voicemail. Text after text. The number alone would have once sent my stomach into knots. Now I just watched the flood with an odd detachment. I did not listen to them all. Only enough to understand the rhythm. Mom's voice first, sharp and panicked. She scolded me for not answering, then slipped quickly into pleading. She said the grocery stores would be crowded, and she needed to finalize the Christmas dinner list. She reminded me how much the family relied on my organizational skills. There was another message about the mortgage company calling again, about how she did not understand their notices. Lila's voicemail had a different tone. Annoyance, tinged with dramatics. She complained that my silence was messing with the household energy, that the entire home felt off balance, because I was being selfish. She said the psychic had warned her that I might resist my destiny, but that she needed me to cooperate for both our sakes. I listened to that one twice, astonished at how carefully she had rearranged the story. In her mind, my boundaries were an attack on her spiritual progress. Dad's messages were short and cold. No questions about where I was, no concern, at least not the kind I recognized as worry. Just a demand that I call the bank, call the mortgage company, fix the truck payment, fix the utilities. His voice carried the same authority he used when I was a teenager asking for the car keys, as if my adulthood was on loan and always subject to revocation. I set the phone down on the nightstand and walked to the window. Outside, a few people were walking along a path that curved toward the lake, bundled in thick coats and knit hats. I watched their slow, easy steps and realized that, for the first time in a long time, I could choose to move at that pace too. There was no familiar iron band squeezing my chest, no rising guilt telling me to pick up the phone, no panicked voice in my head listing all the things that would collapse without me. Instead, there was only a quiet, steady feeling, almost like standing on my own 2 feet for the first time. I changed into warmer clothes, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and headed outside. The cold hit my face in a clean way, not like the biting wind that whipped between Denver office buildings. This cold woke you up, but did not punish you. The snow on the path crunched softly under my boots as I walked down toward the water. Lake Tahoe in winter has a kind of stillness that does not feel empty. The water moves, but slowly, rippling in tiny waves that catch the light. The trees stand like sentinels, tall and quiet. I walked along the shoreline, listening to the subtle lap of water against snow and rock, and felt my thoughts begin to untangle. For 8 years, my life had been organized around everyone else's needs. Every paycheck was divided in my head before it even arrived. Mortgage first, truck payment second, mom's credit card third, Lila's latest crisis somewhere in the middle. I did not remember the last time I had sat down to a meal I cooked just for pleasure or taken a walk without carrying my phone like a leash. At the edge of the lake, I stopped and let the cold seep through my gloves, grounding me. I thought about the video, about Marina's tired eyes as she told me what she heard, about the way my family laughed, not just the content of their words, but the comfort, the ease. As if I were not a person, but a character in a story they owned. I stood there long enough for my fingertips to go numb before turning back toward the lodge. Inside, the dining room had just opened for dinner. I took a table by a window and ordered a simple meal, salmon with roasted vegetables and a glass of white wine. No rush. No one called my name from another room. No timer going off for the next dish in a complicated holiday menu. As I took my first bite, I realized how unusual it felt to eat slowly, to taste food rather than inhale it between tasks. There was something almost intimate about paying attention to my own hunger. Later, back in the room, I opened my laptop to check my work email. A message from Chloe Brandt sat near the top of the inbox. She was a newer member of the sales team, ambitious and eager, and she had been shadowing me on a few calls. Her email was polite but a little anxious. She was unsure how to handle a particular client objection on the account. I had just closed and wanted my insight. Without thinking, I started typing a response. I laid out the approach I would take, the language that might reassure the client without overpromising. I found myself explaining not just the tactic, but the reasoning behind it. Want her to feel equipped rather than dependent. When I hit send, I realized something. I was still capable of showing up fully, of being present and engaged and generous. My competence at work had never been the problem. It was where I had been spending that effort that needed to change. For once, my energy was going towards someone who respected it and wanted to learn from it, not drain it. I closed the laptop and sat back on the bed. Outside the window, single snowflakes drifted past the glass, catching the lodge lights as they fell. Christmas Eve was only a couple of days away. Normally by now, I would have been knee-deep in grocery lists and cooking timelines, fielding calls from Mom about seating arrangements, and from Lila about whether her latest boyfriend should be invited. Instead, I was in a quiet room, miles away from all of it, listening to my own heartbeat in a place where no one knew me as a workhorse. A thought rose in my mind, clear and firm. This Christmas Eve will be the ending, the last time I let them write the story for me. I did not say it aloud, but the words settled into my bones as if they had been waiting for years to be acknowledged. And I closed the app. For a few seconds, I just stared at the dark screen, seeing my own reflection in the glass. My face looked unfamiliar, calmer than I felt, older somehow, but not in a tired way, more like someone who had finally stopped pretending. The silence in the room pressed in around me. Beyond the window, Lake Tahoe lay still and dark, the faint lights from distant houses reflected in the water. The snow outside had thickened, soft flakes drifting down in steady waves. Somewhere on the other side of all that distance, my family stood in a hallway, holding their phones, seeing themselves through my eyes for the first time. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My heart was beating fast, but it was not the frantic panic I used to feel when a bill was overdue or someone in the family was upset with me. This was different. This was my body adjusting to the shock of doing something I had never done before. Saying no. Holding a boundary, letting them feel the discomfort instead of cushioning it with my own skin. I did not know how long I lay there before curiosity tugged at me again. Eventually, I sat up, reached for my phone, and reopened the Ring app. The feed flickered back to life. They were still in the hallway. Mom was pacing now, one hand pressed to her forehead, the other clutching her phone. Da stood rigidly near the door, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the tension from the tiny camera. Lila sat on the floor against the opposite wall, scrolling through her phone like she was looking for answers on a screen, instead of within herself. Their voices floated through the audio, tinny but clear. Mom was speaking rapidly, words tumbling over each other. She kept saying that someone must have hacked their phones, that I must have found the video somewhere else. She insisted there had to be an explanation that did not involve them being at fault. Her instinct was to rewrite the story, even as the evidence played on screens in their own hands. Dad responded with a low anger I knew all too well. He blamed this on my sensitivity, on my inability to take a joke, on my supposed ungratefulness. He said I was blowing things out of proportion, making myself the victim as usual. It was almost eerie, hearing him twist reality with the same ease he had twisted my choices for years. Lila kept repeating that she never meant it literally, that the psychic had planted the idea, that she was only venting. She clutched her phone like a talisman, as if the little device might protect her from the consequences of her own words. Underneath her excuses, I could hear something else. Fear. Real fear. Not just of losing money or support, but of losing the person who had always stepped in to cushion her life. My hand tightened around my own phone. A part of me waited for even a hint of genuine remorse, something simple and human. I imagined hearing Mom say she was sorry for laughing, examined Dad saying he had been wrong to treat me like a bank account, imagined Lila admitting that her jealousy and superstitions had gotten the better of her. But none of that came. Instead, their focus shifted quickly away from what they had done and toward what they might lose. What if she stops paying the mortgage? Mom whispered, her voice tight. We are already behind. Dad muttered something about talking to the bank himself, but the uncertainty in his voice gave him away. He had always relied on my competence in those situations. Lila asked who would pay for her next session with the psychic. And for a moment, I almost laughed at the absurdity of hearing that concern, voiced out loud, here in this bare hallway, where everything was coming apart. Mom pulled out her phone again and called someone. She shifted into a different mode, one I recognized from years of watching her navigate the world. The helpless mother's voice, soft, tremulous, just enough tears to sound pitiable without losing control. She told whoever was on the other end that she was worried something terrible had happened to me, that I was not answering, that I might be in trouble. She mentioned hospitals, police, concerned neighbors. It struck me that even in this moment, when faced with a mirror to her own cruelty, her first instinct was to perform for someone else, to cast herself in the role of a frightened mom rather than a participant in the hurt. I cut the audio for a second and just watched. Without the sound, the scene looked like something from a film. 3 figures standing under harsh fluorescent light on a holiday night, holding coats and bags meant for a celebration that no longer existed. Their faces were lined with cold anger and disbelief. Behind them, the closed door to my apartment remained still, a place they no longer had the keys to. I found myself thinking back to the Christmases of my childhood, the years before the money became tight and the resentments began to pile up. I remembered waking up to the smell of cinnamon rolls, the sound of holiday music playing from an old stereo. I remembered watching other kids on television gather around trees while the parents smiled and hugged them. I remembered promising myself that when I grew up, I would work hard enough to give that kind of holiday to my family. I had kept that promise, year after year after year. The truth was, I had been trying to buy the version of them I wanted. The loving dad, the grateful mom, the supportive sister. I had poured money and time and effort into a vision that never existed. All they had to do was show up and take. On the screen, the 3 of them finally started to move. Mom wiped her eyes and said they should go back to the car. Dad muttered that they would deal with me later. Mila pulled herself up off the floor with an air of dramatic exhaustion, complaining that the whole night was ruined and that her energy would take weeks to repair. They disappeared out of frame, one by one. The hallway emptied. The silence that followed felt clean. I sat there for a while, the phone heavy in my hand. I could feel old habits trying to claw their way back into my thoughts, little whispers reminding me that they had, in their flawed ways, done some good things for me once, that they were still my family, that this might be a misunderstanding if I would just talk it through. But then I remembered the sound of their laughter as they called me the workhorse. The way Dad lifted his glass in that video and toasted to my bonus as if it belonged to them by default. The way Lila had said she wished I would disappear, believing wholeheartedly that her life would improve the moment I stepped out of it. I remembered Marina sitting across from me, quiet and steady, saying that what I had seen was not love. I turned off the Ring app and set the phone down on the nightstand. The room felt gentler without their images on the screen, like a weight had been lifted from the air itself. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Below, the snow covered the lodge grounds in soft curves, erasing sharp edges and footprints. A few guests were walking between buildings, their laughter faint but genuine. Inside other rooms, warm lamps glowed, silhouettes moved. People lived their own lives without me having to hold them up. I thought about what tomorrow would look like for my family. They would wake up on Christmas morning in a house whose bills I no longer paid, with a truck whose payment was no longer quietly covered, and with a daughter who had finally stepped away from the invisible yoke had strapped over her shoulders. They would have to decide whether to look at the video again and see themselves clearly, or to bury it under another story. That choice was no longer my responsibility. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what my own Christmas morning could be. Waking up, not to an alarm or a schedule or a list of chores, but to quiet. Maybe I will take a walk along the lake before breakfast. Maybe I would sit by the big fireplace in the lobby with a book and a cup of coffee, watching the fire crack, letting the warmth soak into hands that had always been busy doing things for other people. Maybe I would do nothing at all. The clock on the nightstand crept toward midnight. My eyes were heavy, but my mind felt strangely clear. I changed into soft pajamas, washed my face, and slid under the thick comforter. The sheets were cool at first, then warmed around me. I lay there in the dark, listening to the distant hum of the heating system and the soft whistle of the grain, wind against the window. I thought about little Brooklyn, the girl who used to stay up late wrapping gifts she bought with babysitting money. The teenager who got her first job in a grocery store and handed half the paycheck to her parents without being asked. The young woman who worked overtime shifts, who skipped vacations, who canceled her own plans again and again to make sure everyone else was taken care of. I whispered a quiet apology to her, not for what I had just done, but for waiting so long to do it. This Christmas Eve had an ending, but it was also something else. It was the faint outline of a new beginning, drawn in the dark. With that thought, my body finally unclenched. My breathing slowed. And for the first time in many years, I fell asleep on Christmas Eve without wondering who might need me in the night. Middle of the night. When morning came, it seeped into the room slowly, a thin wash of pale gold across the ceiling. For a moment I lay still, letting the warmth settle over my face. No alarm. No list of errands waiting on the kitchen counter. No phone vibrating itself across the nightstand. Just quiet. The kind that feels earned. I finally sat up, stretched, and walked to the window. The world outside was covered in a fresh layer of snow, smooth and untouched. The lake shimmered faintly beneath the morning light, a glassy silver blue. I watched it for a long time, my breath fogging the glass. Then I reached for my phone. The screen lit up with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, texts from numbers I had known by heart for decades. I did not feel fear or dread, only a faint curiosity, as if these messages belonged to a life that was already fading from my hands. I put the phone on speaker and played the first voicemail while I made coffee. Mom's voice burst out, sharp and panicked. "Brooklyn, call me back. Something is wrong with the mortgage. They said it is overdue, and there is a late fee. Your father is furious, and I do not know what to tell them. You need to fix this today. Fix this." Always the same words. I poured coffee into a mug, the rich smell filling the room as I listened to the second message. This time, Mom sounded even more strained. "The bank said the automatic payment was canceled. Did you do that? Was it a mistake? Please call me immediately." There was no question of why I had felt the need to cancel. Only a demand to restore the world she believed she was entitled to. The next voicemail was from Dad. His voice was clipped and icy. "The truck payment bounced. The dealership called me at 8 this morning. They said they will repossess it if it is not resolved. Call them, and call me when you are done." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. It tasted different this morning. Or maybe I did. A fourth voicemail followed. Mom again. This time her voice cracked at the edges. "Dad's truck was towed. They came right to the driveway and took it. He is beside himself. I cannot deal with this. Where are you? I walked to the small balcony attached to my room and stepped outside, letting the crisp air hit my face. The cold was bracing, but not cruel. It made me feel awake in a way I had not in years. I held the phone loosely in my hand as another voicemail played. It was Lila. She spoke in a whispery, frantic tone, the kind she used when she felt the universe owed her better outcomes. You are messing up everything. My spiritual advisor said dark energy is circling our family because someone is withholding their role. She said someone is breaking the sacred connection. Brooklyn, answer me so we can fix this. I cannot move forward until you realign. Realign. I let out a quiet laugh, breath turning to mist in the cold air. For years, I had bent myself into shapes they could accept. Realignment was the first thing I did the moment I walked away. I went back inside and placed the phone on the table. I let the rest of the voicemails stack silently while I dressed. Thick socks. Warm coat. A knit hat I bought at the last minute at the airport. Then I walked down to the lodge restaurant where they served breakfast, overlooking the lake. The dining room smelled like fresh bread and maple syrup. I took a table by the window and ordered pancakes and fruit. When the plate arrived, steam rising gently, I realized I could not remember the last time I had sat down to eat without multitasking, without my phone beside me buzzing with someone else's priorities. I opened the final voicemail only after the first few bites. It was Mom again. But this time her voice was different, smaller, frayed. Brooklyn, please, I am begging you. Call me. I do not understand what is happening. Do not shut me out like this. You cannot just disappear. You are my daughter. Are you still my daughter? The last question hung in the air long after the message ended. Am I still her daughter? I looked out at the lake. Sunlight shimmered across the water in soft ripples. Somewhere behind me, other guests laughed over breakfast, playing ski days or long hikes. Life was continuing all around me, unburdened by questions shaped like chains. I thought of the video. Dad called me the workhorse. Mom laughed quietly at my expense. Lila wished out loud that my absence would make her life easier. Was I still their daughter? Or had I simply been the scaffolding holding up the walls of their lives? The pancakes dissolved on my tongue as I played the voicemail again, not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted to see if any old instinct stirred inside me. None did. I deleted the message without hesitation, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because responding to it would have meant accepting a version of myself that no longer fit. I finished breakfast slowly, savoring every bite. Afterward, I walked outside to the lakeshore. My boots crunched through fresh snow. The cold pinched my cheeks and made my lungs expand with each breath. The world felt larger in a way it had not before. Or maybe I had been shrinking myself for so long that everything else seemed enormous. I sat on a bench facing the water. A handful of ducks skimmed across the surface, leaving V-shaped ripples behind them. A few children were laughing near the lodge, packing snow into clumsy shapes. I watched them, remembering a time when Christmas morning had meant something simple. Cocoa, new pajamas. My father's laugh before it grew sharp with bitterness. Maybe that was the hardest truth to accept. That you could love someone and still walk away from them. That you could be someone's daughter and still refuse to be their sacrifice. My phone buzzed again, but I did not reach for it. The sound felt like a distant echo from an old life. Instead, I let my eyes drift across the lake. The snow fell lightly, softening everything it touched. I felt something inside me soften too. Not toward them, but toward myself. When I finally stood, brushing snow from my coat, I felt lighter. Not because the consequences had vanished. They were real, and they were only beginning. But because the weight was no longer mine to carry. As I walked back toward the lodge, the wind lifted the ends of my scarf. The cold stung my cheeks, but it also woke something warm in me, something steady. For the first time, their world was falling apart without me holding it together, and I felt nothing but peace. The feeling lingered with me over the next several days, warm and quiet, like a small light I kept cupped in my hands. My time at Lake Tahoe slipped into a gentle rhythm. Mornings by the water, afternoons reading by the fire in the lodge, Evenings where I ate dinner slowly and let my mind wander without a single obligation waiting on the other side of the meal. But time does not pause, even when you wish it would. My approved time off from FinEdge had a clear end date, and I had promised myself that I would return to work with a different kind of backbone than the one I used at home. When my return date approached, I booked a flight back to Denver and checked out of the lodge with a calm eye never would have imagined a month earlier. On the plane, I turned my phone on and skimmed through several new voicemails without pressing play. One transcription caught my eye. Mom said that Aunt Meredith thought she should come find me in person. The idea made my stomach twist for a moment, then settle. Of course they would send someone. It was easier to send an envoy than to look in the mirror themselves. I let the message sit unread. The morning I returned to the office, Denver was bitterly cold. The sky was a hard, pale blue, and my breath clouded in front of me as I drove into the underground parking garage beneath the FinEdge building. The concrete walls and dim lights felt oddly comforting, predictable, a place where I knew the rules. I pulled into my usual spot and turned off the engine. For a moment, I sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. The phone buzzed softly in my bag, but I ignored it. Today I was going upstairs to sign a few human resources documents that would formalize the personal time I had taken. That was all. No detours. When I finally opened the car door, the echo of my boots on the garage floor sounded too loud. I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed toward the elevator bank. Halfway there, I saw her. Aunt Meredith. My mom's older sister leaned against a concrete pillar near the elevators, wrapped in a heavy wool coat the color of dark wine. Her hair was perfectly styled, as always, a careful silver bob that never seemed to move. She held her purse against her body with both arms, hands gloved, posture stiff. She did not look like someone who had accidentally ended up in an underground garage. She looked like someone staging an ambush. She saw me and straightened up. "Brooklyn." Her voice carried easily in the cold air. There was a mix of relief and accusation in it that I recognized too well. I stopped a few feet away, keeping enough distance that I did not feel cornered. "Aunt Meredith," I said, my tone as neutral as I could make it. "What are you doing here?" She gave a tense little laugh, the kind that came out when she was about to lecture someone. "Your mother is beside herself," she said. "She told me you disappeared. She is certain something terrible has happened. I told her I would come talk to you, find out what is going on." I let the words wash over me. The old me would have rushed to reassure her, to promise that I was fine and that I would call Mom immediately, soothe her panic, clean up the emotional mess. The new me just watched. "I am fine," I said. "I've been on a break, that is all." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied my face. "You do not answer your mother's calls, or your father's, or your sister's." She shook her head a little. "This is not like you, Brooklyn. It is not right." I felt my jaw tighten, then consciously relaxed it. "Maybe it is more like me than you think," I said quietly. She ignored that. "Your mother told me about the mortgage notices," she went on, "and about the truck, and Lila. She said you cut them off, just like that, right before winter." Her tone sharpened. "How could you do that? The bank is already talking about foreclosure. Your parents are in their 60s. They cannot start over." The weight of her stare pressed against me like a hand. I chose my words carefully. "I am not the one who stopped paying their bills," I said. "I am the one who was paying them in the first place. For years. That was never my responsibility to begin with." Her mouth tightened. "Oh, come on," she said. "Families help each other. That is what we do. Your parents did everything for you when you were little. Your father worked himself to the bone. Your mother gave up her dreams for you children. Now they need you, and you are acting like they are strangers." Memories flashed through my mind. Dad was sitting on the couch, tired and distant. Mom crying in the kitchen about money, while I washed dishes at 12 years old. Aunt Meredith telling me when I was a teenager that I should not talk back, that grown-up problems were not my business, even as they handed me more and more of those problems to fix. "I am not saying they never did anything for me," I replied. "I am saying that I have carried their choices on my back for 8 years. I paid for their house, I paid for that truck. I paid for Lila's spiritual adventures. And they stood in their living room and laughed about how I was their workhorse. Aunt Meredith flinched, just slightly. "So you saw that," she murmured. Of course she knew. Of course, Mom had called her the moment the video went through. "I did," I said, "and I heard Lila say she wished I would disappear. You heard that too, did you not?" She did not answer. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and shifted tactics, her voice softening in a way that did not match the hardness in her eyes. "Your mother is not perfect," she said. "Your father is not either. None of us are. We say things we do not mean when we are frustrated. But this, setting them off like this, Brooklyn, you will regret it if something happens. You will regret it if they do not make it through this winter, if the house is taken, if the stress gets to them." There it was, the picture she wanted to paint. Not of my parents as adults with agency who had made irresponsible decisions, but as fragile victims whose well-being depended entirely on my willingness to keep sacrificing. I thought of Dr. Henry Calloway, my therapist from years back, telling me in a calm voice that I had been parentified, that I had been made emotionally responsible for people who should have been responsible for themselves. At the time, I half rejected the idea. Now it rang like a bell inside me. I looked at Aunt Meredith steadily. "If something happens because they did not pay their own bills, that is on them," I said. "Not on me. I am not the parent here. I am their daughter. That is who I was supposed to be all along." She stared at me, astonished, as if I had grown another head. She tried one more angle. "What will people say?" she whispered. "When they find out you left your aging parents to struggle like this? What will our family think? Our church friends? The neighbors?" I almost smiled, though there was no joy in it. "Aunt Meredith," I said softly, "that sounds like your concern, not mine. I have been living my life like a public relations campaign for them for too long. I am done." Her eyes widened. "You are being cruel," she said. "This is not you. That lodge, or that friend of Lila's, or that therapist of yours put ideas in your head. I do not know who taught you to be this selfish, but you need to come back to your senses." The words might once have landed like blows. Now they fell somewhere at my feet instead. "No one taught me to be selfish," I said. "I finally taught myself to stop burning down my own life to keep everyone else warm." For a moment, the only sound in the garage was the hum of a ventilation fan and the faint echo of a car door closing in the distance. Her expression hardened. "So that is it then," she said. "You will let the bank take the house. You will let your father lose his truck. You will let your sister crumble, and you will just walk away. That is what you are telling me." I held her gaze. "I will let them face the consequences of their own choices," I answered. "I will not keep shielding them from reality at the cost of my sanity or my future." She shook her head slowly, disappointment arranged carefully across her features. "You will regret this someday," she said, "when they are gone. When you are standing over a grave. When you have no more chances to make this right." The image she painted tugged at an old reflex inside me, a fear of permanent loss, of unforgivable mistakes. For a moment, my throat felt tight. Then I thought again of the video, of 3 people who had me, alive and generous and willing, and still chose to tear me down behind my back. I drew in a breath and let it out. If they wanted my love, they needed to treat it like something precious when they had it, I said. Not like a resource they could drain and laugh about. I will not keep trading my life for their comfort. Her face flushed, a mix of anger and disbelief. "You are making a terrible mistake." "Maybe," I said. "But it will be my mistake, not theirs." At that, I stepped around her and walked toward the elevator. My heart beat a little faster, but my feet did not falter. Aunt Meredith spun where she stood. "Brooklyn," she called after me, "do not you dare hang up on your family like this." I pressed the elevator button and felt the slight vibration as the car descended. I turned back to her one last time. "I am not hanging up," I said quietly. "I am just finally putting the phone down." The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, the fluorescent light washing over me. She stayed rooted to the concrete, staring at me as if she did not recognize the woman in front of her. Just before the doors closed, I said the last thing I needed to say. I am not responsible for their choices anymore. Her mouth opened, but whatever words she was about to throw at me were cut off as the doors met, in the middle, and sealed shut. As the elevator began to rise, I felt the vibration through my shoes and up into my legs. It was the physical sensation of moving away from something that had held me in place for far too long. For the first time, I let the silence on my side of the story stand without rushing to fill it. When the doors opened on the fin-edge floor, the familiar office smell of coffee and printer ink drifted out. I walked through the quiet hallway, signed the last of the human resources paperwork, responded to a few work emails, and kept my mind steady. I did not look at my phone again. Not once. By late afternoon, I was already back at the airport, with a one-way ticket to Reno in hand. I did not overthink it. I simply knew that the life I needed was waiting for me, somewhere near Lake Tahoe, in the kind of quiet that lets a person grow new skin. A week later, I signed a lease on a small townhouse in Nevada County. It sat just a few miles from the lake, tucked into a row of modest homes with pine trees leaning gently overhead. The place had a narrow brick walkway, a little balcony upstairs, and a small patch of fenced yard that would someday hold a garden, if I ever learned how to plant one. The first time I unlocked the front door, the space felt empty, but full of possibility. Pale walls, hardwood floors, a single pendant light swaying slightly from the air I let in with the door. I stood in the entryway with my suitcase beside me and listened to the silence. Real silence. Not the kind that waits for a demand to break it. I spent that first evening on the floor of the living room, cross-legged, eating takeout Thai food from a paper container. The town was quiet in winter, but cars passed occasionally on the road outside, their headlights brushing across the walls like soft, friendly ghosts. I took slow bites, letting the warmth of the curry settle into me. The quiet was so strange at first, it almost felt loud. Over the next few days, I furnished the townhouse one piece at a time. A small wooden dining table with 2 chairs instead of 6. A soft gray couch that did not need to withstand family gatherings. A lamp with a warm amber glow that made the evenings feel safe. I hung a framed print of Lake Tahoe on the wall and set a bowl on the counter where sunlight collected in the mornings. Every decision was mine, not based on a budget stretched thin by someone else's choices or on a need to impress or accommodate. Just mine. FinEdge approved my request for hybrid work without blinking. Nate Caro sent a brief note congratulating me on another high-performing quarter, making it clear that my location mattered far less than my results. For the first time, my job felt like something that served my life instead of consuming it. I set up a small desk near the upstairs window and arranged my laptop, planner, and a little plant I bought on impulse from a local shop. Some mornings, I worked with a sweater wrapped around my shoulders, the valley fog still clinging to the trees outside. On break, I stepped onto the balcony and watched the birds hop along the railing. It felt almost decadent, this quiet rhythm. But healing does not happen in straight lines. The old world still tried to pull me back. The first voicemail came from Lila 2 days after I moved in. I saw her name on the screen, stared at it without emotion, and let it roll to voicemail. Later, when I listened, her voice was hushed and frantic. The psychic said, "If you do not come home soon, everything will collapse. He said your energy is fracturing our house. Please, you have to come back before the next moon cycle. Nothing is right. None of this is right." Her words drifted into a whimper at the end, a sound that once would have sent me straight to her side. Now it washed over me like cold water, bracing and clarifying. I replayed it once, not to feel guilt, but to understand how much of my life I had spent responding to her fear as if it were fact. Then I deleted it. The next voicemail came the following morning, from Dad's number, but I did not listen to it. I deleted it before the preview could finish loading. After that, I went into my settings and began blocking their numbers one by one. Mom, Dad, Lila, even Aunt Meredith. A quiet click each time, a closing door. It was not anger. It was peaceful. A different kind of message arrived the next day. Chloe from work requested a video call, the kind marked urgent. When I answered, her face filled the screen, anxious and pale. She apologized for bothering me outside of work hours, and then stumbled over her words until she finally admitted that her family had asked for several $1,000 to cover what they called a temporary setback. The more she talked, the clearer it became that she was teetering on the same edge I had lived on for years. I listened, really listened. Eventually I asked, "What would happen if you said no?" She blinked at me, as if the question itself was a strange object she had never held before. "They would say, I do not care about them," she whispered. "They would say I am selfish." My throat tightened, not in pain, but in recognition. And then I said something I had never said to anyone before. Being a daughter does not mean financing someone else's denial of their own responsibilities. Her eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth and nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She was letting something settle inside her, just as I once had. When the call ended, she wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. "Thank you. I do not feel crazy anymore." Afterward, I sat back in my office chair and stared out the window. Somewhere in Nevada County, the snow was beginning to melt around the base of the trees, revealing patches of earth. Small shifts, quiet ones, but still real. My own life felt like that. Ground showing where snow had always been. That afternoon, when I checked my email, a confirmation sat at the top of my inbox. "Your booking to Florence in April is confirmed." I read the subject line twice, my breath catching in the hollow of my chest. 6 years ago, I had planned that trip. I saved, researched, mapped out the museums I wanted to see, even learned basic Italian phrases. Then Mom had lost her job, and Lila had needed another round of psychic guidance, and Dad's truck had broken down. So the dream went back onto the shelf, a neat folder in a drawer marked someday. Now someday, I have a departure date. I clicked the email open. Flight details, itinerary, a small note from the travel company wishing me a beautiful journey. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. The idea felt almost unreal. Me, walking streets lined with centuries-old stone. Me, sipping espresso at a cafe in Florence, with no one calling to ask if I could cover a bill or fix a crisis. Me, existing for myself. My eyes stung unexpectedly, but the tears did not fall. They rested there, warm and steady. Not sadness, not even joy, just a kind of quiet disbelief that my life could expand beyond its old borders. I stood and walked to the small dining table I had assembled myself. The wood gleamed softly in the late afternoon light. I ran my fingers along the smooth edge. This was mine. This piece was mine. This future was mine. Outside, the sky had turned a deeper blue. A few early stars shimmered faintly through the branches of the tall pines. I walked to the window and rested my forehead lightly against the glass. For the first time in my life, I had chosen a home not out of obligation or convenience or fear of disappointing anyone. I chose it because it felt right, because it gave me space to breathe, because the view from the window made my heart loosen one quiet inch at a time. And as I stood there, watching the evening settle in, I understood something I had never understood before. Life does not begin when other people finally notice your worth. It begins the moment you decide you deserve the life you keep imagining. A soft wind brushed the branches outside. A few pine needles tapped the window like fingertips. I closed my eyes and let the stillness sink into me. It was the closest thing to freedom I had ever known. We passed, and that feeling did not fade. It deepened, like roots settling into the earth. Winter laid a soft blanket over Nevada County. The pines outside my townhouse shifted under the weight of snow, and sometimes in the early morning, when the sun slid through the branches just right, it felt like the whole world held its breath with me. One late afternoon, I was sitting in my small living room with a mug of tea, watching the light fade over the trees. The house still smelled faintly of fresh paint and new furniture, that warm mixture of possibility and wood. My laptop sat open on the coffee table. Work emails cleared. Travel confirmations neatly filed in a folder I had named Italy at Last. A notification pinged in the corner of the screen. A new email. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the sender, Captain Ross, Fire Station 12. I clicked it open. His message was simple, but full of warmth. He thanked me again for the Christmas Eve dinner that had unexpectedly arrived at the station. He wrote about how his crew had been scheduled to work through the holiday, away from their own families, and that the catered meal felt like a small miracle. He said they did not know who sent it at first, only that someone had thought of them. When they finally traced it back through the catering company, he said, they wanted me to know that the food had lasted through the night shift, that they had laughed and told stories around the table, that for a few hours, the station had felt less like a workplace and more like a home. I reread the lines slowly, feeling a tightness in my chest I had not expected. All those years I had poured myself out for people who did not value it, and yet a single act, redirected to the right place, had blossomed into something kind and genuine. It struck me that the same money, the same effort, had brought more gratitude in one night from strangers than my family had shown me in 8 years. I typed a short reply thanking him for his service and telling him that his email meant more to me than he knew. When I hit send, a small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. It felt like the universe was quietly confirming I had not become cold or cruel by stepping away. I had simply stopped pouring into a bottomless well. Later that evening, I pulled my suitcase from the bedroom closet and set it on the bed. It was the same navy bag I had used for work trips and rushed visits back home, but this time it looked different. Lighter somehow. It was no longer a symbol of escape or duty. It was a vessel for a choice. My trip to Italy was only a few weeks away. Florence first, then trains to small towns I had only seen in photographs. Tuscany, Siena, maybe a day trip to Venice if I felt adventurous. The itinerary lay printed on my dresser, but I knew I would let myself drift where I wanted once I arrived. For once, there was no one else's timeline wrapped around mine. I opened the suitcase and started folding clothes. A couple of dresses that made me feel good in my own skin. Comfortable shoes for wandering cobblestone streets. A light jacket, because spring in Italy could still be cool in the evenings. As I tucked each item into the case, I could feel a younger version of myself watching, her eyes wide with something like awe. 6 years earlier, I had hovered over a different confirmation email for flights to Rome, then closed the tab and transferred the money into my parents' account instead. There had been overdue bills. There had been an unexpected repair. There had always been something. This time, there was only me. My phone lit up on the nightstand, screen facing up. For once, it was not a number I recognized from Aurora. Those had long been blocked. The preview showed a message from Chloe. She had finally told her family she could not send the money they wanted. She wrote about how they were angry and disappointed, and had said some cruel things. Then she wrote that she had slept through the night for the first time in months. I sent her a few simple words of support. I told her that sometimes the first night we sleep well after setting a boundary hurts and heals at the same time. We carry both sensations for a while. That did not make the choice wrong. It made it human. After the message went through, I turned the phone on silent and left it there. No more rush to check every sound. The last piece of my old life to arrive came in the mail a few days before my 20s flight. It was a thick envelope forwarded from my old Denver address. Inside was a notice from the mortgage company, addressed to my parents, with my name in small letters on a line once labeled co-borrower. The words were sharp: past due, penalties assessed, delinquent. There had been a time those words would have sent me into a spiral, scrambling to fix everything before anyone in the neighborhood or the extended family found out. Now I set the letter on the table, sat down, and stared at it calmly. My name had been attached to that house, but my life no longer was. I pulled out a pen and wrote a short note to the bank, removing my name from further communication and reminding them that I no longer contributed to that loan. The consequences, I wrote, belonged to the primary owners. I mailed it the next day with a feeling of quiet release. That evening, I lit a candle in the center of my new dining table. The flame flickered, casting soft shadows across the room. The house felt lived in now. A throw blanket draped over the couch, a pair of slippers near the door, a stack of books on the coffee table, no evidence of chaos, no piles of unopened bills that belonged to someone else. I sat at the table and thought about the word workhorse. How casually Dad had said it. How easily Mom had laughed at it. How confidently Lila had wished me gone. certain her life would blossom the second mine stopped intersecting with theirs. I had been their workhorse. There was no denying that. I had carried their weight, but somewhere along the line, I had forgotten that I was also my own person, a woman with her own dreams and wants and fears and joys. Not a character in their story, but the main character of mine. That was the quiet revolution. Not the decision to stop paying, not the trip to Lake Tahoe, not even the video I sent back with those 2 little words. Wish granted. The real revolution was the shift in how I saw myself. I was not disappearing. I was reappearing in my own life. A few nights before my flight, I stood in the living room with my packed suitcase by the door. Through the window, I could see the forest beyond the townhouse complex, dark trunks and silver branches etched against a sky scattered with stars. Snow still clung in patches. It would be gone soon, but for now, it held its ground. On the coffee table sat my laptop, still open to Captain Ross's email. Beside it, my printed itinerary to Italy. Behind me, the quiet hum of the heater and the faint tick of the kitchen clock. I walked to the window and rested my palm lightly against the glass. My reflection stared back. I almost did not recognize the woman there, not because my face had changed so much, but because the strain around my eyes had eased, the constant tightness in my jaw had relaxed. I looked like someone who had finally stopped standing at the back of her own life. At that moment, I thought about all the people who were still sitting in kitchens like the one I used to have. Phones buzzing, family voices rising, someone telling them they were selfish for wanting a simple piece of peace, someone calling them a workhorse. Too emotional, too sensitive, too much, or not enough. If any of them were listening, if any of them ever stumbled across my story, I knew exactly what I would tell them. I drew in one slow breath and let it out. Feeling my shoulders drop, I did not disappear from the world. I only disappeared from the role they tried to force on me for 8 years. And that, in the end, was the most honest revenge I could have chosen. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.